Welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Doug Dane. Doug, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, awesome. So Doug is a survivor who has risen above a past filled with kidnapping, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, and violence to experience a life of freedom, gratitude, thriving relationships, and abundance. Now acting as an international keynote speaker and mindset mentor, he has turned his personal experience into a duplicable system to help people discover their true identity and live a life free of guilt or shame. It's outlined extensively in his debut novel, Mistaken Identity, a guide to letting go of a past that's holding you back. With his firsthand experience in tow, he's on a mission to guide those struggling to overcome a troublesome past, a brighter future for themselves, their families, and the world. Doug, welcome to the podcast. As I'm reading that, I'm thinking, this is for me. Let's go. But before we get going here, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised in a city about an hour outside Toronto called Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. And I divide my time now between Toronto and New York City. I'm here in New York right now, and I just go back and forth every 2 to 3 weeks. My partner's here, and my daughter's in Canada, so I go back and forth and spend time between the two, which is really, really fun.
Okay. Doug, how the heck did this start? How did all this start?
The story, the book, what?
Yeah. How is it that we're sitting here right now talking about this? What happened?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. The story that is in the book came out in 2001. I was 39 at the time, and I had wrecked another relationship. So for me, coming from, my past abuse and the resulting trauma of that, and all, of course, the junk that goes along with it in terms of how you feel about yourself, that was pretty much all blocked out most of my life. I early on, around 23, I got into business. I had come from a very poor family as well, and I was working in factories and gas stations and McDonald's and things like that. And I got into business, and I failed fairly quickly. I went bankrupt and trying to figure it out. And but then I became successful in business, started earning money. It's a kind of a separate story, but so that was 1991 through to 2001. I was succeeding, but I didn't feel good about myself. I was nervous. I suffered from anxiety and depression, and a lot of dis-ease, illness challenges, things like that, and just not feeling good about myself. Now, you wouldn't have known that because on the outside, I was a really good actor. I had to be a really good actor when I was little to survive, and I became a very good actor to try to continue to survive and try to thrive as well. Anyway, of course, I wrecked a lot of relationships. My second marriage had failed, or I wrecked it. And I was in separation counseling. And luckily I came upon a woman who was wise and experienced, and she started asking me some questions. And she saw that, there must have been some abuse in my background. I said, there wasn't any abuse in my background. I mean, I grew up in an alcoholic home, and I remember a little bit about that, but most of it had been blocked out. And so she got me to do an investigation. She said, look, your way's not working. You're struggling. You don't feel good about yourself. There has to be something in your story that's causing this.
Wow.
And so it'd be a good idea for you to go back and figure it out. So we didn't do a lot of therapy around the story. I just did a lot of investigation around the story, almost like an intellectual observer, because in my business skills, and she was smart. She applied almost a business approach. We had goals, we had a plan, and I investigated this story. I met the social workers that placed me in that home when I was an infant for adoption. I got my birth records, my adoption records.
Wow.
I hired a private investigator. I found my birth mom. I never met her. I met my birth mom's family. I met the police detectives that investigated the ring of pedophiles and the sexual abuse that I was caught up in from 13 through 15. So the detective that interviewed me after my kidnapping, I met with him, had coffee with him, family, friends, teachers, neighbors. And I put this whole story together. I go, oh my God, no wonder I've been feeling the way I've been feeling about myself, And my counselor, Ellen is her name, she said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go public. I want to go big. And she said, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I think I'm going to submit an article to the Guelph Mercury, which is, the time where I was living, 100,000 people. She goes, I thought you were going to go big. And I said, okay. So I started sending it everywhere. Oprah, People Magazine, anybody I could think of that was big.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, the national newspaper, the Toronto Star in Canada, picked it up. And it was on the front page of their lifestyle section on a Saturday. And I remember picking it up 8:00 that morning, getting my coffee. And by the time I got back to my inbox, my email and my website were in the article because I had written it. And I had like 600 emails in my inbox and, all these people thanking me and, saying I was courageous, brave. And a lot of people that had went through my story were thankful that I went public, and they felt better because they could relate. And what that did for me is my story, it talking about it or writing about it normalized me. It didn't normalize what happened, but it normalized me.
Wow. All right, Doug, hang on. Let me just interject.
Right.
This is incredible. And you're saying so much here. I want to make sure we touch upon. Okay. So you mentioned a couple times you blocked out what had happened. You touched upon your childhood and the abuse there, and you jumped a little to when you were in business. And so are you saying that throughout your childhood and into your teens and 20s, you had not, at least intellectually, understood that you had been traumatized?
That's correct.
That is correct. Okay. That's so, correct. Yeah. Okay. And was there ever any thought, oh my God, my childhood was effed up, I need to get help, or anything like that?
No.
Nothing. Okay. And it wasn't until, and you said you were a good actor, you were able to survive, and it wasn't until you met that therapist, who sounds incredible. She was like, something's going on here. Yeah. Now, when she started talking about that, can you talk a little bit about the recognition of having experienced what you did experience? Oh my God, I was involved in this. What was that like for you to come face to face with that understanding?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's interesting because by that point, I was fairly obviously disconnected emotionally from all of that. But it was something that she said, because she was talking about, being, mistreated in my home by my parents, because they were both really struggling, violent alcoholics. And what really struck me, she said, "Can I ask you a question, Doug?" I said, "Sure." And she said, "How would you feel if that little boy was your son?" And then boom, it hit me. And I got emotional. And I wasn't saddened for me, the adult. I was saddened for that little boy. I felt really terrible for him. And then it gave me perspective. I go, yeah, he was really mistreated. Like, that's just wrong what happened to him. That was the first real connection. And then there was a few more times like that where, we had these conversations, or she posed these questions, like the kidnapping. I didn't see it as a kidnapping. I got in this guy's car and we drove across the country, snuck out on a Sunday night. I had a different perception on it. And so she brought a normalized, justified perception to what happened, because I was minimizing what had happened, which essentially was minimizing me and my own worth and all of that. So that was really how it started to happen.
Now, so you mentioned kidnapping, and to the degree that you're comfortable speaking about this, so you were involved in a pedophile ring?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So at 13, I kicked my mom out of the house. I picked her up one day, or she was beating my dad. I picked her up, I threw her outside, phoned the police, which was, the police were always at our door, and they took her away, and she never came back. And so by that time, my dad, he was pretty rough shape. He was arthritic and, broken down from alcohol and the effects of being a war vet, all that stuff, his own stuff. And I was running the streets, skipping school, and, the schools were looking for me. They come knocking on, my dad's door. And anyway, I ended up hanging out at this Radio Shack store downtown Kitchener, where I live. And we got hooked up with the manager there, and he invited us over to his house one night for a party. And we got there, and he said there was going to be girls and booze, and I'm 13, right? And we get there, and his wife was leaving for the night. She was going out. And that was the beginning. The man, his name was John, invited my friend up to stairs to his bedroom. I knew what was going on, but, I stayed in the living room, and then it was over, and we walked home, kind of silently. And that was the beginning. And so this man, along with a couple of Boy Scout leaders and another guy in the music business, it was 4 of them. And they, corralled at least what we knew of from the investigation, 23 boys, undoubtedly more, but there was 23 boys in the investigation. And so, yeah, I got hooked up with this guy named Randy, and I was his kid. That's what they would call their favorite boy. I was his kid. And so for a couple of years, we were hanging out with these guys, and it was a very obviously confusing time because it felt good physically. And as an adolescent, I thought just me and my friend, my next door neighbor, who also got caught in this, I thought we were just exploring gay sex. Mm-hmm. I mean, they gave us the book, The Joy of Sex, and they showed us a passage that, what we were doing was normal. And then looking back on the records, I thought I was a little boy, 13 through 15, and this was a man. Well, it turned out he was 26. He was just a young man himself, Mm-hmm. And so that's basically, I spent a couple years on that. And then the kidnapping is where it ended when the detectives arrive at my door on a Sunday night when we got home and, throw these photographs at me. And they, they're kind of threatening me to reveal other boys, because one of the other men, the Boy Scout leader, one of the dads had caught him, and the dad was out in his car with a gun trying to catch this guy. So it was very serious, and they left that night. And my dad, of course, wasn't equipped. They didn't speak to my father and my brother. So I was just kind of left in my basement alone. And then I turned to drugs and alcohol, to quitting school to kind of cope. And that's kind of what the next 15 through 23 was, just drunk and stoned and partying and, trying to cover up how lousy I felt about myself. But again, everything I just said, of course, was these are memories or facts that I've got all blocked out.
Now, was your meeting Ellen, the therapist you spoke of, was that the big turning point for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I had I'd been in therapy before, because this was my second marriage that had failed. Of course, I'd wrecked all my relationships, and it was bizarre because I was in such inner conflict, because at the heart of me, I felt I had integrity and I had standards, and I was very honest in work and in business, very honest, but obviously dishonest over here. So I'd been in therapy. I remember when I met Ellen, I go, oh my God, same old questions, same old friggin' result. Like, here we go again, another therapist asking the same old questions. But there was something different. And her plus her requirement of me, which was, if you want to work with me, you have to study this book. And she handed me the book, The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And I credit that book literally for saving my life. I mentioned it in my book. And she said, if you want to work with me, you're going to have to study this book, and we're going to work with this book, and you're going to have to apply what's in this book. And it was a real turning point. It was one of the biggest ones. Of course, the article.
What about that book? What about that book, Doug, was so resonant?
Well, it was funny because she goes, read the book. It's not a little book. I went and got it. It's like a 2-hour read. I came back the next week. She goes, you read the book? I go, yeah. She goes, what do you think? I go, it's the dumbest thing I've ever read. She goes, read it again. So I go read it again. I come back next week and she goes, read it. I go, I read it, but it's really weird. She goes, read it again. And it was weird for me because the author he's a Mexican Toltec spiritual leader, Nagual, from an ancient tribe. And so I just was uncomfortable with spirituality and all that stuff. But when I got into it, I go, this is so freaking simple. He just explained so well how we got conditioned when we were little, and we made these agreements with ourselves. We were domesticated like an animal, literally. We got judged. We started judging ourselves. We made these agreements. We live with those agreements, and that's why we're struggling, and we're in what he called a fog. I go, man, oh man, that's me. Mm-hmm. And so I just love the simplicity of it, and the fact I just had to replace all my agreements with the 4 he gave me, which was be impeccable with my word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and just do your best each day. So I adopted those agreements, and it really gave me an understanding. No wonder I felt the way I felt about myself. No wonder, in spite of the things I'd been through, why I was doing what I was doing. So it let me off the hook, but it also got me to take responsibility because, I could have carried on with a real victim mentality because I was for a long time.
Yeah. I want to remind everyone that I'm speaking with Doug Dane. His book is called Mistaken Identity, A Guide to Letting Go of a Past That's Holding You Back. We'll, of course, have that linked up at the show notes page here at the traumatherapistpodcast.com, as well as the 4 agreements, too. Why did you write? You talked about that article you wrote. Mm-hmm. Why did you write that? Talk about that process of saying to yourself, okay, I want to write this.
Well, through assembling the story and through the 4 agreements, I realized that I was living a lie. I was lying to myself. I was lying to others to cover up who I was or wasn't. And I was handed a lot of lies. And so I wanted to tell the truth. And I got inspired by an author, Dave Pelzer. He had 3 books: Child Called It, Lost Boy, and A Man Called Dave. And he had a really rough story as well. And so I related to him. I go, I'm going to write my story. And I just realized, and so when I first told somebody about the story before, so at first it was my girlfriend at the time. Then it was my sister-in-law. That was a second person. And just with those 2 people, and then a few more, as I told my story, it opened the door for them to share their story. And all of a sudden and I go, this is what talking works. I got to talk. And so that's what motivated me to write the article. And then, of course, that led to speaking engagements. It was on television. It was in a couple of books. And then people kept saying, hey, Doug, will you tell your story? Sure. And then because of the publicity, people were approaching me, go, how'd you do it? And I go, I know what I did, but I couldn't tell you how to do it.
How did you do what?
How did I go from that story?
Right. Okay.
Going public and then, freeing myself and letting go of all the negative emotions. Like I have no negative emotions or feelings or followed or trauma from any of it. One part in the book talks about how I hired a PI to find Randy, the man that abused me, because I wanted to know his story. Like something must have happened to him for that to perpetuate in him. And so I wanted to meet him and just, at that time, I hired him. I was coaching people. I wanted to hug him and coach him and see if I could help him.
Was there any, there's so much, there are so many elements to this story. How did you, and of course, trauma impacts people very differently. And of course, it sounds like it impacted you very severely. You talked about failed marriages and relationships and alcohol abuse, but what helped you specifically work through and process the trauma that you had experienced?
How would I answer that? I think, well, I mentioned in the book, one of my friends was reading one of the articles on my adoption. She goes, you feel grateful that you were adopted? I go, yeah. She goes, explain that. I said, well, now knowing what I know and through the four agreements, different things I was learning, because I really embarked on this pursuit to understand. My perspective on my adoption, for example, is that I could have landed in any home. I mean, the fact is I was given up for adoption as a baby, ended up in foster care. 6 months later, I got adopted. I could end up in any home. And whatever home I would have ended up with, I would have been a different person than I am. And so that gave me objectivity, you know. Mm-hmm. I was also, as a business person, I was trained to be objective and use my intellect to problem solve and to get ahead. And so, and again, because Alan, somebody that I began to trust, approached my therapy the same way as a third party. I was really observing this little boy, and she said that, she goes, you got to parent this little boy, mm-hmm. and you have to nurture him and take care of him and help him, make him feel like he's okay. And so I think I just brought objectivity to it, and then really don't take anything personally. So very quickly, I stopped taking the abuse personally. It didn't happen because of me. Mm-hmm. It just simply happened to me. In fact, mm-hmm. I saved a little boy's life because it could have been another little boy that landed in that family. And I survived and I'm thriving, And so objectivity, I think, I learned emotional neutrality. I just brought these skill sets to the story and to my perception of the story, and my judgment.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. It sounds like there was a confluence, a very fortuitous confluence of elements and events and meeting people that really worked well with your skill set and who you were to help you move through this process. All right. So how do you get to the point where you're writing this book, Mistaken Identity?
Yeah. Well, so about 8 years ago, 2014, I found myself still, doubting myself and, nervous and uncomfortable. And by this time, so 2001 to 2014, so for 13 years, on again, off again, people are, seeing the story online or seeing the art, whatever, and they're pursuing me and go, Doug, can you help me? And I go, yeah, I really want to help you. And so I really want to understand how to transfer what I did, because I didn't want to send people to therapy. I didn't think that I don't think that's the answer for everyone. I think it's helpful, but ultimately that's not the solution or my solution. And so in 2014, I just happened upon, I just, like everything, I suppose that you said, I kind of stumbled along another person who became probably my biggest mentor. His name was Bob Proctor. He passed about a year ago. He was world famous in the personal development space. And I went to work for him and we became friends and he mentored me. And I started to understand the power of my mind and how my mind actually controls my brain and my nervous system and my thoughts and my feelings. I didn't know that. Nobody taught me that. And so as I started to understand that, that was the final phase, if you will, to really the letting go. And Bob kept telling me, he goes, like, Doug, just let it go. Let it go. I go, Bob, you don't understand. He just laughed. And I said, no, you didn't go through what I went through, Bob. And okay, Doug, whatever you say. He just kept saying, Doug, it's so simple, yet you're making it so complicated. You can just let it all go. I said, it's not that. Anyway, that's on and on. Right?
And well, Doug, let me interject for 1 second here. Yeah. Can we just put a little focus on this, your one statement there? You said he taught you that your mind was in control of ABC. What do you mean by that?
Well, we have a gift that was given to us called our mind. Our mind operates our brain and nervous system. That was discovered in the late early 1900s. William James, one of the still greatest psychologists of all time. I mean, he discovered that. And a lot of the work that Bob had learned in his, 50 years or so, studying the mindset and psychology and religion, all these different things. He discovered that through one of his mentors, how the conscious and the unconscious mind actually operate, and how your thoughts and feelings direct the physical state. Our body is an instrument of the mind. And so we generally, I think most people just kind of live in a very reactionary way to what's going on around them. They're out the outside world. Things happen, people do things, they see things, they experience things, and they just kind of react. And we all have this conditioning from our environment, and we're brought up, with certain programming, and we see ourselves a certain way, and we just kind of habitually operate, day to day without thinking too much. And if you're struggling, you just kind of think this is your lot in life, and that's the way it is. Well, I discovered that I could actually take possession of my own mind, use what's called accurate thinking, and I could start to, control what I was thinking about and control what was coming at me or what was in me. And I could look at it a different way. I could be objective. And whatever you think determines how you feel. Your feelings set up how this body feels. Like a lot of people I now know, a lot of people suffer from anxiety and depression. It's just quite simply they are worried about their future, and they're thinking way too far ahead, or they're looking at their past with guilt and resentment, and it causes them worry, doubt, and fear, and it presents itself in a state of anxiety, which moves to depression, and that ultimately turns into dis-ease. So I didn't know all that. I learned that, and that really made a big difference for me. So I started to calm down, became more relaxed, more equable. My anxiety disappeared. I just got more, and people go
because it sounds like you're being more conscious and intentional about your mind. And when Bob was saying, let go, and you were like, Bob, you don't know. How did that unfold for you?
Well, he just kept repeating it because I kept repeating the same old story. I got kind of sick of saying the same story over and over again. I go, I keep telling the same story. He just laughed. And he just kept reminding me that, because what I learned from a mindset perspective is the way the mind operates. It's creative and automatic, and it's goal seeking. It'll help you solve your problems and get where you want to go, but it only operates under certain rules. One, you must be in a relaxed state. Number two, you can't think too far ahead. And number three, you definitely don't look backwards on the past, because there's nothing back there to help you go forward. If there is, your memory will bring it up. And I was just talking about the past, thinking about the past. By doing that would trigger emotions about the past. It would bring back the guilt and the resentment and the shame from the past. So if you think about the past, you literally live and feel the past. Well, that causes you to struggle to go forward. He said, Doug, he said, stop talking about the past. Stop talking about it. Stop thinking about it. Just stop it. There's a great. Have you ever seen that? Have you ever seen that video with Bob Newhart on Mad TV where he's playing a therapist or a psychiatrist?
Yes, Bob Newhart. Yes,
he comes in and he goes, "Stop it!" STOPIT.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah. And one of the things Bob said, he said, Doug, your mind is a machine. That was proven. Your mind is a machine. You're the operator. He said, you're not operating the machine properly by thinking about the past. I go, you're right. And so he just kept reminding me to think properly. Yeah. Because I was in charge of my thinking, and I was in charge of how I was feeling and all my results. He goes, it's all your fault, Doug. I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, you're responsible for your thinking. So if you're suffering, it's all your fault. You can't blame the store anymore. He says, you're an adult. You're 49 years old. Like, you're in charge now. And he was just, he was able to kick my butt in a very kind way.
All right.
And he was right.
Yeah. How did he, this is awesome, Doug. So, okay, talk about the book, how that came about.
Yeah. So I'm having all these conversations, and working for Bob, I was running his coaching division. We had, at the time when I was there, we had 2,000 plus people, coaching people on this information. And of course, so I was helping them with their businesses, and of course, I was doing my own coaching, and I talked to thousands of people. I got my calculator out one day. I figured 5 days a week I was talking to people. I just went 8 years times 52 weeks times 5, and usually 2-3 people individually, thousands of people, and everybody kept struggling with the same thing. I go, everybody has a self-esteem problem, or they have themselves wrong. They don't believe in themselves. They don't feel good about themselves. They have a low opinion of themselves. They have an inferiority complex. They have low self, and just like everybody I talked to, and a lot of successful people, right? They were doing really well. And I was the same way. I'm going, oh my God. And it was in my journal. I remember reflecting back on this. I think everybody has what's called a mistaken identity. They're stuck in a prison of their own making. The real villain is their conditioning and their upbringing and the system that now keeps them stuck. But the key to their freedom lies inside. If they could just understand their story and why they see themselves the way they see themselves, they could break free. And so then for 8 years, I'm writing this book in my head. But it's not like I wanted to write a book. I was trying to create this formula. And so just as I coached people, I just started to test the ideas, and I'd share with people, oh my God. And then people have these breakthroughs. And so I was assembling this kind of as I went. And then Bob said, when are you going to write your book? And I didn't want to write a book. Even up until, just over a year ago, I was not looking to write a book, but the book was a great way to get the message out. And so anyway, I talked to somebody, and I got a publisher, and I said, look, I'm not writing this book unless it's a really good book. It's got to work. If you get into this book with me and you go, Doug, you're off track, you can keep the money. We'll just walk away. I don't want to write a book, but I want to put a book out that helps people. And it's not just a book; it's a handbook. It's got it's directive, it's prescriptive. It gives you steps to take to let go, as Bob said. One of the chapters is called "Let It Go," dedicated to him. Is that this can happen really fast? I dragged it out way too long. I made it way too hard. I thought it was complicated. It wasn't. Bob was right. It's simple. It's easy.
But why does it not seem? It is simple, but it's not. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people aren't doing it. Honestly, I'm thinking to myself, I got to get this book sincerely, because I have limiting beliefs about myself, and I was identifying a lot with what you're saying. But why aren't we doing it? Why is it so hard to let go of the story of our past?
I think there's 3 reasons. One, as you mentioned, we have these limiting beliefs, and I think we just have enough evidence. And the longer we go through life, we have more accumulated evidence that there's just something wrong with me. Okay, and there's all these great books and great podcasts, all these great things out there, but it doesn't work for me. It'll work for you, Guy, but it won't work for me. Right? I think that's number one. Number two, since the early 50s, it's true. Yeah. Our mode for our mental well-being, it's been a paradigm since the 50s. I mean, my mom got hooked into it, drugs. She went through, at the time, 4 rounds of shock treatments, pills. We've gone down a certain road with psychology and mental well-being. It's a paradigm, and we've been following that for quite a long time, and that's just what we do, and it's kind of normal. But clearly, it ain't working because the numbers only get worse. So something's wrong. So I think we're locked into a viewpoint of mental health and what life is like if we've struggled. Even if you come from a good family, the other thing is, out of all the people I talk to, half statistically have been through abuse. The other half haven't, but they're still suffering from the same mistaken identity for different reasons, And then I guess a third reason is these days it's very easy to choose the victim mentality.
Mm-hmm.
It's convenient. It's a lot more comfortable. We don't like the discomfort of the perceived suffering to get to where we want to go. And so I think we just kind of use as a great excuse to, stay stuck. I did that. I think it's just easier.
Yeah. Who's this book for?
Definitely the initial strong motivation was, there's just so many young people that get in trouble like I did, and they really struggle. And then they grow into adults that struggle, and they raise children that struggle. So anybody that's gone through any form of abuse, you really need to understand and change your mind and your perspective on what happened to you, the story. And that's what the book does. It gets you to just, because I changed my perception. And so I'm modeling that you don't have to look at your abuse as a bad thing. I look at it as a gift. I really, truly do. That is for people. So half the population has gone through that. And then those people and many other people, 95% of our population, grow up. They're conditioned and they're programmed and they're judged and they're criticized, they're teased, and they just form a perception of themselves that's not true or not accurate. And they struggle in their life, in any area, maybe struggle most of their life. And so I was talking to a lady the other day, 37-year-old woman. On the outside, you think, man, she's got it together, beautiful, healthy, she's got a successful business. And she was going through the book over 30 days. The book's designed to actually go on a journey for 30 days. Oh. And she goes, Doug, I've been reading this in the month of February. That's when we were talking about it. I went through the month of February. She goes, February 2023 has been the best month of my life ever. And then she went on to talk about what she had let go of. She let go of worrying what people thought. She let go of being insecure. She let go of, covering up her face with makeup because she had acne problems when she was young. She just was letting all this stuff go. And so it's really, like you said, you got to get the book. It's for everybody. And if you're not happy in life, if you're struggling in some area of your life, if you don't feel good about yourself, there's nothing wrong with you. You just believe some things that are wrong. Mm-hmm. And you just got to change your mind about how you see yourself so you can be yourself. That's what the book is about. Just be yourself. Let go of this past that's holding you back, because you're using it as a reference point to predict your future. And you're wrong about yourself.
I, interview a lot of people on here, many of whom have books, and, almost all of them sound really, really interesting, but I don't always say, I'm going to go get this book, but I'm getting this book. It's just, and I sincerely mean that. All right, Doug, wow. I mean, Jesus, you're so freaking inspiring. How do people get in contact? So are you doing coaching now?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the industry of mentoring people in their own personal and career development. So whether it's people that want to grow a business, or people are just like I was, there are stuck personally. So yeah, I do a lot of group coaching and individual mentoring of people as well. And I'll continue to do that. What I really want to do is I want to get the message that's in this book. The book is a messenger. I want to get the message that's in the book out any way I can, whether it's, speaking publicly like this, or on, doing keynotes or whatever, but I'll just continue I want people to get this message straight in their minds. And my big goal is to really change the world, because the world needs a change. Yeah. So yeah, you can find me at dougdane.com. That's my website. Okay. You can order the book through there, or you can of course order it through stores or online. You can find me on social. Just type in Doug Dane, Dane. Go to the website, contact me, reach me there. Get the book. I'm also running a program where you can actually go through the book with me. So you get the book, and then over 60 days you can hang out with me as I take you through the book, and I get on calls live, and I help people and answer their questions and hot seat coach them, put them in front of everybody else, and put them on the hot seat. And I just want people to get the message and feel better about themselves.
Awesome, Doug. I'm so glad I got to meet you today, and really excited to share this with my audience. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care.